Mothers wept in private but led their daughters anyway. Some said, "We survived it. She will too." Others said, "It's better to suffer a little now than be cast aside forever." Welcome to Omar's story Nook, where history gets spicy, legends get a remix, and healing becomes heritage. Every tale you hear is a whisper of Omar, echoing through drum beats, through lullabies, through the breaths of women who chose not to pass down pain. There is a tradition, old, wrapped in silence, carried not by monsters but by mothers who thought they were doing right. It's called female genital mutilation, FGM. Some call it cutting, but it was never just a cut. It was control. It was fear turned into ceremony. It was a blade passed down like an heirloom of harm. In Somalia, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, across Africa and the diaspora, it lived in whispers, dressed as purity, masquerading as womanhood. Girls were led behind curtains, told to be brave, told it was tradition, told it was love. But when they emerged, they were not whole, they were altered, they were silenced, until one generation said, "No, not my daughter." This story is not about shame, it's about reclamation, about women turning wounds into warnings, songs into resistance, ritual into rebirth. This is not just the story of what was done, it's the story of what we are undoing together, because tradition must evolve. And healing? Healing is a revolution. This is the abolition of FGM, culture, courage, and creative reclamation. It began with love, or at least that's what they were told. In villages wrapped in sun and smoke, among the Somali, the Fulani, the Amhara, the Maasai, the Yoruba, girls were prepared, washed, braided, blessed with shea butter and sacred songs, then taken to a room, or a hut, or a stone beneath a tree, and there they were caught, not by strangers, by women, by aunties, by grandmothers who had once been led the same way. This was not done in malice, it was done in tradition, with hands that believed they were protecting girls from shame, from ridicule, from rejection by men who wouldn't marry uncut women. In these communities, FGM was wrapped in honor, a rite of passage, a badge of purity, a moment where a girl was told she had now become a woman. But behind the songs were screams, behind the prayers was pain, and behind the silence was a legacy of wounds passed down like a family name. The blade cut not just flesh, but freedom. It scarred the body, yes, but also the trust. The relationship between a girl and her mother, between a child and her childhood. Infection came, fevers, complications during childbirth, lifelong discomfort, sexual trauma hidden beneath bridal veils. But no one spoke, because silence was sacred. To speak out was to insult your ancestors, to break the chain, to say aloud what the whole village wanted to forget. And so generations carried this burden, wrapped in silence, sealed with cultural pride. Mothers wept in private but led their daughters anyway. Some said, "We survived it. She will too." Others said, "It's better to suffer a little now than be cast aside forever." Because in places where patriarchy policed purity and womanhood was defined by what had been taken away, FGM was seen not as violence but as insurance, but trauma as a voice, even when buried, even when disguised in ritual, even when called culture. It lives in the tight-lipped smiles, in the shudder before intimacy, in the stories women never tell, because they fear being blamed for surviving. And yet, some began to speak, whispers at first, a daughter asking, "Why did you do this to me?" A mother replying with tears instead of answers, an auntie who refused to take the blade into her hands again. Somewhere, deep in this intergenerational ache, a crack formed in the silence. A hairline fracture in the wall of "we've always done it this way," because pain, no matter how neatly dressed, cannot stay hidden forever. This was not about blaming the women who carried out the ritual. It was about recognizing the system that made them believe it was right. This was not about erasing culture. It was about protecting the living parts of it and letting the harmful parts be buried with the blades, with the shame, with the lie that silence equals love. Silence was tradition's armor, but even armor rusts. Even stone breaks when enough voices gather. Change didn't start with laws, it started with women speaking. Survivors refused to forget. They painted bodies whole. They stitched trauma into tapestry. They turned shame into performance art. Ayan Hirsi Ali, Leila Hussein, Nit Nailante Lengete, women who ran, who returned, who resisted. They used poetry, therapy, and protest. In villages and refugee camps, they asked out loud, "What are we really doing?" Radio hosts in Hausa, Kiswahili, Yoruba, Amharic shared real stories. Theatre troupes reenacted ceremonies and paused to ask, "Is this the best we can do?" These weren't attacks on culture, they were invitations to evolve. FGM wasn't just cutting anymore, it was a violation, a decision. And decisions can change. Some mothers paused, some midwives said no, some fathers listened. A girl in Uganda stood and declared, "I am whole, I am woman, I am not ashamed." They didn't cheer, but they didn't stop her either. That moment, that was the shift. The goal was never to destroy tradition, it was to reimagine it. Because tradition is not a blade, it's a story, and stories can evolve. In Tanzania, elders created alternative rites of passage. Beaded crowns replaced blades, songs replaced silence, power replaced pain. Gods were still celebrated, still honored, but they are left whole, not scarred. The rituals felt older than FGM, as if healing had always been the heart and the knife a mistake. In Kenya, Samburu grandmothers now spoke in schools. In the Gambia, festivals united grandmothers and girls in dance, not in fear. In Nigeria, street theater challenged cruelty while honoring roots. Communities asked, "What do we want to pass down? Fear, obedience, or voice?" Slowly, the answers changed. The knife was buried, not in shame, but closure. FGM bans passed across the continent: Senegal, Burkina Faso, Nigeria. But more powerful than laws were stories on social media, in salons, in songs. Women didn't reject culture, they rewrote it. This story is not finished, it is still unfolding in classrooms, in courts, in whispers between mothers and daughters. So many women around the world have undergone FGM. A lot of women still carry scars, many still bleed in silence, but millions more won't because someone said no. Artists are painting bodies all on walls that once held silence. Toolkits now exist in Somali, Swahili, Hausa. FGM is taught in schools, not as taboo, but truth. Some women who once wielded a knife now bury it in relief. "I didn't know," they say, "but now I do," and that is enough. Healing isn't always loud, it's a breath, a ripple. A girl telling her friend, "I'm not doing it." A mother saying, "I'm sorry." A boy learning that love doesn't require harm. The new stories are here in poems, reels, murals, dances, in teenage girls who say, "I said no, and I am still worthy." This isn't just a women's issue, it's a human one about how we love, how we protect, what we choose to pass on, because the story is still being written. And we are the storytellers now. They called it tradition, we called it trauma, they called it purity, we called it pain. But we called forth something deeper. We called forth healing, not as an apology, not as a trend, but as a choice. A sacred, messy, courageous choice to break the silence that once held 1,000 screams, to turn ritual into rebirth, to say to our daughters, you are not incomplete, you are infinite, and to our mothers, we love you, we forgive you, and we are choosing different because revolution isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a paintbrush, a lullaby, a poem written in blood turned ink. Sometimes it's a girl who walks away and never looks back. And that is enough to bend time. FGM may be old, but healing is older. Wholeness is wiser. And love doesn't cut. So when they ask, can culture evolve? You say, yes, because we are its architects, its caretakers, its storytellers, and the story is changing. Right now, until the next whisper of Oma, stay listening.